vegetarian, then paleo. You stopped restricting. You're trying to love yourself more, but nothing seems to be working fully. And you might feel hopeless about ever feeling good in your body. And every time you fail, you trust yourself less. As the larger world feels increasingly in peril, caring about how you feel in your body may feel frivolous and even more hopeless. We are at a time when our individual and collective stories about what to do for our bodies, health, and the world are crumbling. Because these stories we have, they aren't working for how our bodies or our world actually works. And I believe centering our bodies, all bodies, not just thin, white, or quote, good bodies, and what all of our bodies need to thrive will help orient us in a better direction. There's no one-size-fits-all diet, exercise, or way to biohack. Good health is much less about willpower or discipline and more a complex interweb of our societal structures, food choices, emotional history, environmental exposures, and privilege. There is a great loss of certainty and safety when we initially have to face what is real versus the half-truths we've been fed. But the loss of these stories creates an opening. If this opening is pursued with curiosity and discernment, we can discover our awe-inspiring ability to create and embody a new body story for our physical and political bodies and the earth. I'm Ali Shapiro, and I host the Insatiable podcast, so we engage in the type of conversations that will lead us to radically new body stories for ourselves, each other, and the earth. To do that, we discuss a more truthful approach to freedom from cravings, emotional eating, binging, and being all or nothing. We explore the hidden aspects of fighting our food, our weight, and our bodies, and dive deep into nutrition and behavioral change science and true whole health. But fair warning, this is not your parents' healthcare or the conspiratorial crazy of the wellness world. This is a big rebel gathering to those who want to hold nuance, context, and complexity in order to lead the way to a healthier future for all, because our lust for life is truly insatiable. Hello, everybody. It's been a while, like a year and a half since I did the last Insatiable season of Sugar Rehab. And so much has changed in my world, specifically becoming a parent, struggling with insomnia, going through menopause. And then we have the external world with COVID, the undeniable reality of our climate crisis, just all of this. It feels like a lifetime ago since I got behind the mic. But before I get to today's episode, a few housekeeping items, a personal update, and then we'll get to the first episode. So this season, episodes will be released every other Wednesday. I'm learning to slow down, and this is one way this is showing up. So expect a new episode every other Wednesday instead of every week. I will be returning to my IG lives the weeks the podcast doesn't come out to discuss whatever questions you have from the episodes. I have so many DM conversations, email conversations with you all about the podcast, and I want us to have them so that everyone else can learn from them. So once you hear the podcast episode, DM me your questions on Instagram at Ali M. Shapiro. That's ALIMSHAPIRO. And the Wednesday that a podcast doesn't come out, I will be doing a live to answer your questions. So this comes out September 29th. I'll do an Instagram live October the 6th. And then the 13th, another episode. And then the 20th, go in that rhythm. So think of these as kind of after the show. And if you can't attend live, the Instagram live videos will always be in my feed. I'll also be hosting a free workshop in November. So if you're familiar with my work and you want to understand it a little bit more deeply, how it can help you, I'll be hosting that in November. More details on that to come. Got to still pull it together. And lastly, I just wanted to share, I launched my second round of Truth with Food certification. We sold out of that. I'm so excited. We are geeking out on theory because Truth with Food is evidence-based. It's not just like something I came up with. It's actually taken about 14 years to create and iterate. So next year at this time, we'll have so many more people who you can work with who are trained in the Truth with Food process. And the people who have joined all have such amazing backgrounds and their own stories and their own areas of expertise. And I can't wait to see what they do and with it and all the people they're going to be able to help. So if you're interested in getting in certified yourself, the next round will begin in September 2022. That will be here before we know it. But get on my list at alishapiro.com if you're interested on that. And then I just wanted to give you a little bit of a personal update. A lot of what I've been learning that can help you with your own food, body, and health choices, I'll be sharing throughout the season because I am relearning and learning a lot. Sometimes I feel like life was like, let's give you as many health challenges as possible so that you can figure them out. And because you're persistent and stubborn and have the capacity to do so financially and privilege wise, time wise, so you can help other people because it's been a lot of body stuff the past couple of years. But right now, I am feeling such relief and joy after these 2 really challenging years. Carlos and I have really turned a corner with becoming parents. Essa is coming up on 2 years old at the end of October. He started sleeping through the night consistently this August, which is huge. You heard that right, at 21 months. I'm so glad I didn't know it would take this long, especially because I'm someone who cannot not sleep. He wasn't waking up like a newborn or a baby for that long, but we didn't feel confident in his sleep as he'd often be up for several hours a night, even after doing a gentle version of sleep training around 9 months. The sleep training definitely improved things, but it also fell off the rails, especially March through July. And so we are experiencing a massive improvement in quality of life. From August till the date of this recording, which is the end of September, he's only woken up one night, and it was on the full moon in August. And we joked he was howling at the moon, but it was a quick, he got back to sleep within an hour. So I was like, this is nothing. So that's just been a massive improvement in our quality of life. He's also in daycare full time, which feels like a miracle. I just love daycare. And there's a lot of research that shows about the benefits of daycare, but it's also just, it works for our family. I know everyone's different, but we freaking love daycare. He loves it. Part of what was so hard was we were just really struggling to find childcare. And that was largely from COVID. And I'm lucky that we all had COVID in February because the research on natural immunity is highly encouraging, and he handled COVID really well. He oddly slept great through his COVID fever, go figure. And COVID disrupted his life and sleep less than all the sickness he was bringing home from when daycare first started. So we feel really confident about him being in daycare right now, even with the Delta variant and whatever other variants come through. And so having kids is so vulnerable, and COVID just adds this other layer. So if you're a parent with a little one going back to school amongst all this chaos, my heart is with you. I wanted to share a great resource I relied on to navigate COVID because the media, I'm going to sound like the political affiliation I don't want to sound like, but the mainstream media has really sensationalized a lot. But then I see, especially in the white wellness world, them reducing COVID to just being about taking care of yourself and eating well. And that's not true either. So I just find Dr. Elise Song, who you can find at healthykids_happykids on Instagram, to be amazing. I'm not affiliated with her or anything. I read all her articles. I attended her COVID vaccine webinar back in March when it first came out. And she is just giving you the evidence-based, she says, facts over fears about how to take care of your kids at this time. So if you're worried about that for your children or just how to build their immunity, some people are predicting it's going to be a bad flu season. Pediatricians are saying it might be a bad RSV virus season, even though most kids will be okay with that virus. But she's just all about supporting you to build your immune resiliency for kids. I just find it really hard to find someone who isn't using COVID these days to build their business by creating extreme narratives on either side. I can see what they're doing psychologically to people. Okay, here's how you know where you belong. Here's your beliefs. And it's all sensationalized and extreme and oversimplified. But she's not doing that. She's just she's treating us like adults and giving us the information. And she has a great immune supplement kit for kids that I ordered for Essa to help support his system, right? You never know with health. You can do all the things. And it still not work out. But this gives me an extra level of safety for his health. And he really likes taking it. So it's probably sweetened with something, but I'm like, Essa, it's time for your K3 and D2 or K2 and D3. And he's super great about it. So yeah, I just recommend her. That is Dr. Elise Song. And you can find her at healthykids_happykids on Instagram. And again, I'm not affiliated with her. I just think she has amazing information. So emotionally, I'm trying to hold a new center, especially really like deep in my soul. The transition into parenting was really hard on me. I feel like my postpartum period was the last 2 years, and I'm just starting to come out of it. And all this is happening when I'm going through menopause. Becoming a parent is massively hard as it is. And then when you're going through a major hormonal shift and body shift, whoa, it's a trip. But I'm managing. I'm figuring it out. I kind of know what my course is now after a couple of years of trying to navigate that complexity. And becoming a parent is just a massive identity shift that, of course, I don't think we talk about enough because it disproportionately affects mothers. Now, more so today, dads are speaking out because they're more involved, and especially those who are really involved, which Carlos is. And I'm really lucky for that. And again, I can hold how much I love Essa, and then I am in awe of the miracle of miracles that he is. And it's just these days, it's just nonstop laughs and excitement and all he is learning, and his personality is coming through. I'm definitely more a toddler mom than a newborn baby mom. There are definitely amazing moments then, but I'm having a blast right now. And we joke, I've only really had about 4 or 5 periods since giving birth. So like we joke, Essa really was like the last train leaving the station. Like, I just feel like there was like 1 penny in this like penny piggy bank. And we were like, please, trying to get it out and it came out. And having him is one of the best things I've ever done. And I have also felt so much loss because of parenthood. I had a pretty sweet life going on before. And obviously it's very sweet now, but the transition, there was a lot of loss on top of, becoming a parent in a pandemic. And again, navigating through all of this while basically being in menopause and going through the change of menopause is quite a trip. And I've had so much body stuff. Like I said, not only do you have to recover from childbirth, pregnancy, then I had insomnia. My breast milk never came in, which was absolutely devastating to me. I had plantar fasciitis. We all had COVID. I got really sick in June of 2020 when Essa had just turned about 7.5 months. I have no idea what it was. I thought it was COVID. COVID was easier than whatever I had. Still don't know what it was, but I hadn't been that sicker since I had been on chemo. And then, still having so much of my pregnancy weight, injuring myself while trying to work out. That's just like the body stuff. And I think like many of you, I've just had a lot of intense challenges physically and emotionally the past couple of years, and a lot of new questions I'm asking myself around what changes need to be made. So there's been so much to grapple with for all of us, and loss is just everywhere. I know COVID alone has caused a loss for all of us, right? And then life just keeps marching on. And while we haven't all had equal losses, we must still individually reckon with our losses if we want to grow and make meaningful changes. What I found to be true in my life is that if I don't face the loss and how it can make me more healthy, resilient, and whole, it will eat away at me. It used to make my eating out of control, and now it usually leads to burnout. But in both situations, it's always trying to avoid the uncertainty of navigating what is true versus what I thought to be true or wanted to be true. For example, when I was done with my cancer treatments almost 30 years ago, I thought that to be a strong survivor, it was best to just move on. And I actually believed I could if I just focused on being grateful that I survived. And that was a really important piece. And grief and loss stays with us. And for many of us, if we don't metabolize the energy of that pain, it gets channeled into our eating, weight loss fantasies, or our health. As a teenager, my exercise became obsessive as I literally and metaphorically ran away from the loss and the deep truth of how vulnerable I truly am and how short life truly is. You can't unknow that after going through a life-threatening illness and perhaps a pandemic. This set the foundation for my out of control eating and made me focus on the eating instead of the root causes for decades. But you can't out eat your pain or fill your loss with food, no matter how much you binge. Loss of any kind often brings up some level of disorientation because life wasn't what we thought it was or would be. And I think COVID has disoriented all of us in some way, especially if you've gone through a major change. like becoming a parent, losing a parent, changing a job, or ending a relationship. And maybe you've done all four, right? And remember, loss doesn't always mean a tangible change. It could be the loss of the way you thought your life would go or how you thought the world worked. I felt a tremendous loss when Trump won the election. I had never been a USA, type of person. I have actually relatively always been critical of the USA, and I love this country, right? It's my home. But I didn't realize the degree of rot, racism, and sexism that informs where I live and how I am unknowingly participating in it. It's been an eye-opening and humbling 5 years since I started my anti-racism work, and it's been freeing to see more of the truth, including there's nothing to show you how much your country hates women than when you become a mother and realize the inadequacy of support for you, even if you have relative privilege like me. I didn't have the privilege of working for an employer and having, paid time off, but that should be something that the government manages, right? So Carlos went back after 2 weeks. I went back after 6 weeks. And I really think that had a detrimental effect on our health. This dovetails with my anti-racism work because as I'm learning more deeply of how much I understood feminism is what Koa Beck in her book calls white feminism, which only focuses on the individual and not the collective care we need for mothers, families, and children. I highly, highly recommend that book. We're at a really unique, the silver lining of everything burning and not working, which we can see nothing is really working out here, is that we have a really unique chance to change family and medical leave policy. And we need to call our Congress people and get involved in that. At least I think we do. Again, that's my part in this. So how we reorient from loss depends on what we are willing to face, including our role in the loss if applicable. And by applicable, something like losing a parent involves loss, but there isn't necessarily anything to own. But in the example of Trump getting elected, I had to own my own part in participating in this racist system I didn't know I was participating in, for example, and commit to anti-racism change for myself and the collective. So facing loss and owning our part is a really important part of us becoming healthy adults, especially today when we need capable, creative, resilient people who have the stamina to lead us with better questions and more creative answers. This will help us make better choices and have more satisfaction moving forward. Now is an interesting time to consider what we really need and want, because for so many of us, our habits changed dramatically during COVID. Maybe we order our groceries from Amazon now, or we work out at home or not at all, or we rarely get dressed. Or for some of my clients, they're considering having a baby on their own, or their careers were radically altered, like my client, Serena Ryder, who you will hear about on this season We're going to do a whole episode with her. And she's a literal rock star. And she had her entire life of touring stop, right? For others, my clients, they ended graduate school or they got promoted or they turned down promotions because they really wanted to preserve their quality of life. And they have enough status, they have enough income, right? For right now, right? So I think there's a lot of these self-actualization questions that are happening in various degrees for all of us. Our habits and most likely what feels meaningful has changed so much. And we can either continue on with what we had to default to when was based on what was forced upon us from quarantine or our past, or we can mindfully consider new choices and changes that will support our bodies and health, including ones that can help us integrate what we've discovered we really want for ourselves and our lives. So if you're new here, you might be thinking this is way deep for a health and wellness podcast, and you are correct. We go really deep here because the deep end of the ocean is the most full of awe. I hope this insatiable season can support you in reorienting in a healthier direction, that it will have made this pandemic crucible count for something, that it gives you information and inquiry to come out of this making and going for the changes you need and want, including understanding that we need collective solutions right now. But we have to realize that as individuals, right? And it's not either or. We can work on both. So let's do this. On to our episode, Guilt-Free Strategies to Increase Food Satisfaction. Just going to take a break here for all of you. I know that was a lot, so we're just going to take a deep breath. Okay. For our opening episode, I wanted to ground us in what I mean by trusting satiation, a truce with food secret. That's the theme of this season. If you want to understand more what I mean about that, check out the preview that was released last week or that is in your feed. Because if I put myself back into the me when I was still battling food in my body, satiation or satisfaction would have been, I want all the brownies, and that is bad. And there's no way this can be good. Or what I really want is to not exercise, and that will never work because you have to exercise to lose weight and be healthy. Or I want to lose weight to feel like the real me who is a risk taker and is actually pretty confident in my smarts and personality, just not my body. What I couldn't understand or put language to at the time is that I wanted all the brownies, bread, and weight loss because I wasn't satisfied on several levels. And the levels I identified, there's 3 of them we'll touch upon this season and obviously go deep on them. And my idea of satisfaction was skewed because I was coming from such a holistically deprived place. And so then I would balance through extremes and feel guilty for overeating and binging. Or I thought that I just couldn't eat one of something for the same reasons. And I want to repeat this. For most of us, we can't trust our ideas of feeling satisfied from food because we are coming from such a holistically deprived place. What helped me getting my eating under control at its essence was trusting satiation or satisfaction. And this was not a familiar feeling to me. Part of it was from dieting. Most of us can remember the nothing tastes as good as thin feels mantras I learned at my Weight Watchers meetings, or we grew up in families where our parents struggled with their weight and we were taught to grin and bear it when we felt hungry. Or as my dad always said, he was running from the fat man, implying food required guilt. Within these statements is an implication that feeling satisfied comes from giving in, or we are made to feel guilty for it. Not understanding these ideas are half-baked. #food pun. That was intentional. Or I thought I was healthy because I had a narrowly defined healthy definition of healthy as being cancer-free. Again, hugely grateful for that. And only being 23, I had been struggling with antibiotic and Accutane resistant acne, asthma, allergies. Those were just the A's, IBS, binge eating, and depression. Living in my body was far from comfortable, let alone satisfying, but there were very low expectations on how to move through this. And for me, all the medication I tried eventually failed, and it never really worked all that well. And so there was this expectation of the best we can do is symptom management instead of resolution. Many of my clients struggle with health stuff and they've been gaslighted or dismissed by the medical system that says you're fine when they're not. We have to know we can challenge these unsatisfying answers. Or I exercised religiously and consistently, but it was mostly out of fear of not burning off my calories. As a result, I had a very unsatisfying idea of what exercise counted, let alone how movement could make me feel more satisfied from food instead of using food as a reward for my exercise, which we'll get into in this episode. Because the only thing I really enjoyed about the gym was the people I knew there and going there with my sister. For my Philly listeners and friends, we would go to the sporting club. We would meet at 20th and Locust every morning, as I lived at 21st and Locust and my sister lived at 19th and Pine. And we'd meet at 6 a.m. before she went off to law school and before I would drive out to the burbs for work. And that was like the best part of the workout, was meeting her there, chatting, and then that was it. Many of my clients go in fits and starts with exercise because exercise that counts often, and I'm putting counts in quotes, often requires gearing up when you're exhausted from a demanding career or another thing to fit in that they can't get to. Or I was living alone and traveling a lot for work at the time. I would try to avoid eating with others because I fear I'd cave and go off my diet. So I was deprived of the deep satisfaction that comes from sharing a great meal with people you care about, or the fun of being adventurous with food. I still remember working in Paris. In another lifetime, I had a corporate career. And when I was 23, I was working in Paris in real estate. It was fun on a lot of levels. And I was invited out to lunch by my colleagues there. And I said no, because I was on a diet. And I had bought these rice cakes and peanut butter for my lunch. And I remember the French women coming over and looking at me like I was a mice in a scientific study, like fascinated by this colorless, not very tasty thing being considered a meal, let alone a good meal. Like they were like, wait, this is your lunch? Like it was, I mean, looking back, it's hilarious. But at the time it was like, oh my God, like, so it had a different meaning and feeling back then. I know COVID has prevented us from eating with others. And many of my clients feel a variety of pressure around eating in social situations. either because they want to be healthy and their family is not, or they don't want to feel like they're missing out, for example. So, what could be a deep source of satisfaction, enjoying a meal with people we care about, often doesn't happen. And because we are wired for social connection, which I'm going to get into, we eventually do go out with friends and, quote, go crazy because we assume most of the fun is in the food. And this is just the physical level. We will address the other two levels, emotional and soul, in later episodes this season. Because satisfaction isn't often a consideration in our lives, we often balance through extremes. I think about this on a flavor level alone. Two extreme flavors we have in our foods is salty and sweet. And most of us go on a seesaw of these flavors. But when you add in astringent, bitter, and sour, you don't crave salty and sweet as much, and your food gets much more flavorful. In our next episode, we will discuss how to make cooking simpler to be more satisfying and what flavors, textures, and smells contribute to food satiation. In today's episode, I want to provide you what I think of the 4 foundations of how to feel more physically satisfied from food. The right macros for your body. To kick us off, I want to share a recent study I shared in my Insatiable membership community, published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. The study basically found that obesity wasn't about calories in, calories out, or the energy model of food. That's how it's known often in the scientific community, but rather how the quality of food influences our hormones, what changes our metabolism, which they are calling the carbohydrate insulin model. The carbohydrate insulin model claims overeating isn't the main cause of obesity. Instead, it's about the excessive consumption of foods with a high glycemic load, in particularly processed, rapidly digesting carbs. These foods can cause hormonal responses that fundamentally change our metabolism, driving fat storage, weight gain, and obesity. According to Dr. Ludwig, who was part of the study, reducing consumption of this rapidly digesting carbohydrates that flooded the food supply during the low-fat diet era lessens the underlying drive to store body fat. As a result, people may lose weight with less hunger and struggle. And basically what he's saying is when your blood sugar is balanced, you're going to be more satisfied from food. One of my clients chimed in the discussion about how when she's eating junk food, she feels like it's harder to get back on track the more she eats that stuff. And now she knows this isn't laziness or lack of willpower, but blood sugar deregulation, that lesser food quality. And this study confirmed what she was experiencing. But if you don't know this, you might assume you have no discipline rather than how your body is physiologically designed to work. And this is also why I love the end goal of intuitive eating, but just allowing yourself to eat all forbidden foods can change your physiology dramatically and make it actually harder to hear your body's natural cues. These foods are designed, literally billions spent in research and marketing to hijack your sense of satiation. And I think this is an unconsidered risk with intuitive eating and why I teach blood sugar regulation in Truths with Food. Blood sugar regulates how fast food, not fast food, how fast, quickly food breaks down, and thus how much glucose and insulin is in your body at any one time. Your blood sugar control is a major influence on feeling satisfied from food. Clients often even realize that about 50% of their emotional eating was actually blood sugar deregulation, which can increase feelings of anxiety, cravings, and hunger. Now, you might be thinking, I don't eat a lot of processed carbs. Well, I don't either. However, think of this study on a continuum, with obesity being on the extreme end of what happens and highly processed foods being on that end of what really drives this. But there's a lot in the middle, right? And I'll be getting into 3 other factors that will influence your blood sugar sensitivity that have nothing to do with food shortly. But what I want you to take away from this study is that it underscores the need to keep your blood sugar balanced and how hard it can be if you don't understand how blood sugar works. You will basically feel hungrier and hungrier because of the flood of glucose in your body and how your body processes that. Now, this carbohydrate insulin model, just so everyone knows, it's not a new model. It's been around for a while, but this study showed a lot of evidence towards it. And I think it's really has a lot of merit to it. And also it's how I've seen myself experience food satisfaction as well as clients. And so we know, and what the study is saying is really, again, your macros, which I should have defined this at the beginning, but I'm assuming everyone knows, but if not, your macronutrients from a nutritional perspective is protein, carbohydrates, and fat. And it's a blood sugar regulation is about making sure those macronutrients are in proportion to each other when you eat. So it's not just about one food per se, but the total load of them. And not only can it be challenging to figure out how blood sugar affects you, because most people think only diabetics have to worry about blood sugar, but nope, everybody does. It's really important to your health. And if you have a good framework or you have someone who really understands how to teach you about it, it doesn't have to be that difficult. But if you're just trying to figure it out yourself, it can be. Because adding another layer is that we know from other research that there's not a one size fits all glycemic index. And so basically what that's saying is there isn't one diet that's right for everyone. And so in other words, we could all eat a banana or nana, as Essa says, he loves them, and all have different blood sugar reactions to it. That is just, right? That's like, complexity. The most impactful way I've found to start to begin to address the insulin carbohydrate model or blood sugar balance is knowing what macros work for our body. And the macronutrients, again, are fat, protein, and carbs. And often if we aren't eating the right percentage of macronutrients for our body, and everyone's different, our blood sugar gets deregulated, and then we feel unsatisfied from our food. And then we crave all the bread or pasta because we've deprived ourselves of the complex carbohydrates our body needs, for example. Or we crave salty carbs or sweets from not enough fat. Often clients are craving potato chips or peanut butter cups in part because of needing the fat. The cravings get exaggerated because you're at such a deficit. Or one of my best childhood friends was in recently, and she was saying how she had done this detox, I think a couple years ago, where she was eating like 800 calories a day. It was something really minimal. And she said it triggered old eating habits because she had binged on so much food after the cleanse. And I said, you could see it as triggered, or I see it as your body was trying to protect you because it thought you were in a famine and so amped up your hunger so you would go find food. Remember, our body's evolution hasn't caught up with food being available 24/7 and in such concentrated amounts. So our bodies hear excess food in the case of the carbohydrate insulin model, excess food in terms of excess carbohydrates, right? So rapidly digesting stuff. And that could be from not having enough fat and protein with our carbs, or it could just be the type of carb, or not enough food, as was my friend who did her detox. Both of those things, excess and not enough, both register as famine in the body, and fat storage increases, which is exactly what this study showed. Now, some people will argue that study that I just talking about the carbohydrate insulin model, and that's fine. Science is a process, not a destination. We're always learning. And yet I've just seen this carbohydrate insulin model to be very accurate in myself and clients. Now, in season 10, episode 2 of Insatiable, Food Freedom 1, Stop Monitoring Yourself Around Food, or How to Stop Monitoring Yourself Around Food, we dive deep into the framework I use to guide clients to figure out what macro percentages they need for their unique bodies. And I also have a free breakfast experiment to start to make this real for you, which you can find at alishapiro.com/breakfast-experiment. I'll also link to it in the show notes. So that episode dives deep into the various percentages. But the important thing I want to address in this episode and underscore is, from what I've seen, most people don't know the right macronutrients for their bodies, or realize, or they aren't eating the macros they think they are. Specifically protein. It's really hard to get in enough protein often. And it's natural to not know this because we are taught to view food only from a calorie perspective, because the old paradigm is about energy in, energy out, instead of food being information to the body. And we aren't taught to connect food with satisfaction. That often feels dangerous, as maybe you think you won't be able to stop if you really feel satisfied from your food, or it makes you feel guilty, right? Satisfaction is often associated with those fears. Satisfaction to our bodies feels like consistent energy, focus, stable moods, and an absence of cravings, anxiety, or a decreased anxiety and hunger. Satiation is not feeling juice cleanse high. I describe it kind of that amazing where you almost feel a high. That's often pure adrenaline and cortisol plus high blood sugar from usually a lot of carbs like juicing in this case, and not eating enough of the right macros. My friend who had done this whole foods detox said, she's like, I felt amazing. And I was like, part of that was the adrenaline and cortisol your body was producing so that you'd go find food, right? So physical satiation to me is a gentle lightness that leaves me feeling grounded. It's a tension of opposites. And it's not so low or full or stuffed you feel dragged down. I want you to think back to a favorite or memorable meal, one where the food was good, the company and atmosphere was great, and you found yourself naturally eating healthfully and moderately. So think back to one of those amazing meals that you had. And I want you to start to locate, where do you feel that satisfaction in your body? What does it feel like? And you may have images, colors, metaphors, which is all language of the body. The body doesn't speak English, or it's not verbal in the way that we identify verbalizing. If you can't describe it in words, that might be another way to know it's totally cool to describe in images, metaphors, or colors. So this is your initial starting point to know what satisfaction feels like in your body when you're eating the right foods for you. When we don't know how to eat to feel this, we can get very confused and overwhelmed listening to experts like trainers who are probably experts at fitness, but often not nutrition, or New York Times bestselling diet book authors. I'll let you in on a little secret. I don't know if this is true for diet authors, but some people buy their own books, and lots of them, to get on the New York Times bestseller list. Okay. I learned about that and was disillusioned with that. Okay. Moving on. That's a tangent. There is a learning curve at first. So my point being is, just because it's on the New York Times bestseller list under the health section doesn't mean it's quality science. There is a learning curve at first to figuring it out for your body, but over time you develop a confidence in your body's cues and signals. And I know it's politically correct to tell people not to monitor these foods today, that's diet culture. And this can lead to hypervigilance, especially if you're doing this like connected to weight loss only. And if you're in that space, I get it. Again, this is where knowing where you are in your food journey is really important. What's your part to own? If tracking doesn't feel helpful to you, honor that. That's cool. And if you start and it's just making you crazy, you can also stop. However, if like me, you found that the more you ate whatever you wanted, the initial monitoring of the macros and connecting it to how you feel instead of weight loss often leads to less monitoring in the long run, as you develop an intuitive sense of what works for you and your blood sugar. And this is another unpopular truth, but intuitive eating isn't as natural as it sounds. When I was battling my food and body, it took me a while to develop an intuitive sense that I actually needed more of a paleo diet. I had so many cravings and I was tired and moody, and I didn't even believe I could feel an absence of these things. So I didn't even know to connect that, hey, would you have less cravings, right? It was just like, was I being good or bad and under my calories? Yet to become intuitive around a topic, intuition is built on pattern recognition. If you don't know how to eat for your body, you have to start making the various connections of what feels good and what doesn't. Having a legitimate gut instinct usually happens from past experiences, and lots of them, especially when most of our food supply is designed to interfere with satiety. So I did an episode on the pros and cons of intuitive eating. I'll link to in the show notes if you're interested in diving onto that topic more. But back to macros and tracking, and what we are looking for with blood sugar control is not one food, but rather the relationship of fat, protein, and carbs, which can also make this challenging. If we take the banana example, you might find that makes you more hungry after you eat it, or you're more hungry an hour later than you would have been had you not eaten it, right? However, if you add some nut butter, you might find it satisfying. So if you know what macros work for you, but you're struggling with cravings or have other health issues like sleep challenges, you might be thinking you're eating a certain way, but you aren't. Again, COVID has disrupted our routines, which probably changed a lot of our eating habits in some way. And this has been my current journey after the major life change of having a baby. I was in such survival mode the first 9 months that we were doing a lot more prepackaged healthy food, but it was still processed. And because I'm gluten-free, this leads to a lot of almond flour products. And when I first started tracking my food for my post-pregnancy weight loss, I realized I was basically eating keto. I was doing 20% protein, 20% carbs, 60% fat. And then I had to start tracking for my sleep stuff once my sleep got horrible and I hired someone to help me. Because I had stopped tracking once I kind of was able to eyeball things. And I realized I was accidentally eating keto again, both times. And now because I'm just really in hardcore perimenopause/menopause, my blood sugar is so much more sensitive because of the hormonal shift and degree of drop in hormones. So our menstrual cycle makes our blood sugar more sensitive the week before and the week during our periods. This is often why people get PMS cravings. They don't alter how they eat. And so often, and you will often feel hungrier because, we had Elisa Vitti on the show and she said, your metabolism is increased those weeks and you need about, I think she said 200 to 250 more calories at that time, but you also need to adjust your macros. And perimenopause is an exaggeration hormonally of these weeks when your blood sugar is more sensitive. So our macros become even more important to get right because we're going to have less resiliency with our blood sugar because of the hormonal changes. And remember, all women are on a continuum of perimenopause to menopause starting around age 35 and through our early 50s. So you're not in perimenopause or menopause. You will eventually be postmenopausal, but it's a continuum, right? And I happen to be in it way early, just most likely from my cancer treatment. So even though I'm just going to be 43 coming up here on October 1st, most people will feel this more in their late 50s, some people earlier. However, we might start having sleep issues or more cravings or weight gain when we didn't before because of these hormonal shifts and becoming less sensitive. And I'll get more into that in further in the episode as it relates to especially lifting weights. So if you are in perimenopause or menopausal and even postmenopause, your blood sugar will be more sensitive and it's probably is affecting your macros and food satisfaction. So if you're feeling fine, carry on. But, and I shouldn't say postmenopausal, you'll always be sensitive. Just definitely during the transition, you will be. I actually don't know about postmenopausal because your hormones eventually level out because it's the drop that makes it kind of crazy. But also with less, I'm working this out on the podcast. I'm going to put a question mark there. But so it can, if you're in that hormonal stage of your life, it could be affecting your food satisfaction, and really knowing your macros will be important. If you're feeling fine, carry on. But if you're having more cravings and energy issues, or in my case, sleep and energy issues, like me, it could be you aren't eating how you think you are eating. Your macros have shifted, or maybe you never knew the right macros to begin with. Now, like I said before, if tracking triggers you, please don't do it. It's not at all for me. So it's super helpful as I'm still recognizing how much protein and carbs I need to get. I'm still short on my protein, even though I know I now need to get 30% protein, 30% fat, 40% carbs. I still can't get to that protein and but I'm improving. That's the point. Every week I get a little bit better. And the other thing that I just want to say about tracking macros is often on an app, it will give you, your overall, I can see overall for the day, my percentages, yet it's really important at each meal to get the right percentages because you can't just when I was dieting, I would try to save all my calories for evening. But that's not how it works. That's not how nature works. We have to be consistent with those macro percentages at each meal. Now, you don't have to hit it right every time, and it will help your sleep if overall you get them right, but it's really important to get those as close to possible at each meal. So here's some questions that can support everyone in finding their macro baseline that don't require tracking. Number one, which macros, protein, fat, and carbs do you deprive yourself of and then find yourself feeling tempted by? And I put quotes in quotes, where you can experiment where can you experiment adding in more of these macros to your meals to see if you feel more satisfied. Okay. So again, I see a lot of people deprive themselves of complex carbohydrates like beans, lentils, rice, quinoa. And then they say they really crave bad, quote unquote, bad carbs. But if they start to add in complex carbs, they're like, oh, I'm so much more satisfied from my meals. And that doesn't sound as satisfying anymore. Number two, where and what does satiation feel like in your body? Remember the question I posed above? Think back to your favorite meal that you ate just enough of. Where do you feel that in your body and what does it feel like? Use that as a starting point for what satiation you can trust feels like for you. Number three, when you felt your best, not necessarily looked your best, but internally felt really great, how were you eating? Consider starting there and then tweaking. And again, if you want to shorten the learning curve for yourself, try my breakfast experiment too. Also, no, not an affiliate, but I do like the Lose It app. You can get a free trial week, I think, but it's great. It makes tracking actually really easy. I just scan the UPC code on the protein that we have. on the Lose It app and the food comes up. It's so easy. And it's starting to show me patterns. Like when I get enough protein, I eat less. Right. It reconfirms for me that I need to figure out this protein situation because I am trying to lose more of my pregnancy weight. I'm about 1/3 of the way there, but still have 2/3 to go. And so getting the right macronutrients has a major influence on our food satisfaction. Again, in episode 2, we'll get into how textures, aromas, and smells affect our satisfaction from food. But this episode, if you don't get your macros, it's going to be a lot harder. All right. Second foundation is sleep. And what's complicated about food and sleep is balancing your blood sugar with the right macros will affect your sleep. And then sleep affects how satiated you feel from food and thus whether or not you balance your blood sugar or not. So the good and bad news is everything's connected, right? This is why I'm a big fan of root cause resolution. It's more work up front for sure. And it pays dividends in the far reaching impact of results and how much stuff clears up when you really start eating the right foods for your body and then doing something like getting enough sleep. So how does sleep affect our food satiation? Well, sleep sends our food satisfaction hormones in opposite directions that we want. Not enough sleep does. So your two main sleep hormones are ghrelin and leptin. When we don't get enough sleep, ghrelin, which I think of as the hunger hormone, and I remember it by grrr, I'm hangry. Ghrelin increases the less sleep we get. In other words, we get hungrier the less sleep we get. Evolutionarily, it's because we need more energy, right? If we aren't sleeping. Like what else were you doing on the tundra, if you weren't sleeping? Maybe you were inspired and doing some art cave by a full moon, but that's, once in a while. And that does require more energy. And when we don't sleep enough, the satiation hormone called leptin decreases. So when levels of leptin are low, the brain tells you to eat more as it thinks there isn't enough fat stored in the body. So leptin really makes us feel satisfied from our food. In other words, not sleeping enough, even a few nights, makes us feel less satisfied from our food and hungrier. And in perimenopause and menopause, our drop in estrogen makes us less sensitive to leptin, right? It's like, ugh. So that's often why people gain a lot of weight in perimenopause and menopause. A little bit of weight gain in menopause can be healthy. Again, everyone's body's different, but a lot of people, I think a lot of my post-pregnancy weight is because of this. And I didn't know it. So I'm sharing it with you so that you can be prepared. So getting enough sleep is critical to feeling satisfied from food and supporting our leptin production and sensitivity, even more so if we're going through perimenopause or menopause. And most of us need 7 to 9 hours a day, fluctuating in my experience with the seasons. Now, if you have trouble sleeping, I want to give you a few tips. Again, I'm still working through it. I'm on a good path. But here's the interesting thing that I have learned is that major life changes like COVID, having a baby, starting a new job, retiring, they can affect our sleep and cause insomnia. But then we start getting into all these bad habits because we're so sleep deprived. So what started our insomnia is not what keeps it going. And this was really important for me to realize. So here's the things that I read about, but didn't actually do until my sleep coach explained to me why they help. So go to bed the same time every night within a half hour is working for me. So I try to go to bed between 10 and 10:30 and then wake up within an hour the same time. Now I've found I can actually wake up naturally whenever, probably because I have so much sleep to catch up on. And like the past 3 nights, I was still up for an hour each night. So again, it's so much better than what it was, but I sleep in because I need to catch up on that sleep that I've missed. And this is because of the emerging field of chronobiology. Our body works on a rhythmic clock, and going to sleep at all different times stresses the body and will make you feel more tired and harder to sleep. So think of jet lag as an extreme version of this. And I know the importance of chronobiology because of how it affects ideal meal times to eat. So learning about this just really clicked easily for me. Number 2, push your bedtime back to 8 hours before you want to wake up. So for me, that's 10 p.m. I used to go to bed around 10, 10:30. I mean, I didn't actually it was all different times. But when I was having the worst of sleep issues, I mean, I was falling asleep at 8:30, 8:45, 9. Some nights I'd go to bed at 11 if I had nap late. Like it was just, but then I'd wake up a few hours later and I'd be up for 4 hours because I didn't have a strong enough sleep drive to take me through the night. And so Honestly, I know we say like sleep training or like what happens with babies and children become adults. It's kind of all the same for the body. I'm starting to learn. So it's exactly like learning how to support a baby to sleep through the night. We have to make sure our sleep drive is strong enough. So my body thought like I was napping from 9 to 11 or 9 to 12 a.m. So push your bedtime back to 8 hours before you want to wake up. And if you're having insomnia, the first week I did this, I mean, I could barely stay up. I was like struggling. I was splashing water on my face. Like I was so tired because I was coming off just like a week of barely sleeping. And then Essa had an all-nighter that night. Feels like a lifetime ago, but I can just still go back there. So it can be hard that first week, but then your body, again, will get into that rhythm. The third thing, don't nap past 3 p.m. and only for 30 minutes or around 7 hours before your bedtime is when your nap should end. Again, adults are just like babies and toddlers. We need to build our sleep drive. So I would be so tired and I might have like clients all day. And so I would try to nap at like 6 when I knew Carlos could watch Essa. And that was just totally sabotaging me because I didn't have enough of a sleep drive. I thought I was catching up on sleep and I was desperate, but really don't nap more than 7 hours before you want to go to bed and for only 30 minutes. Number 4, keep temperatures under 70 degrees. Cold temperatures help your body produce more melatonin. I didn't know that. And that's really an easy change. It was a little bit more difficult, which is why I didn't focus on it because Essa's room is the coldest and we felt like we were freezing him out, but we had an old air conditioning unit from when we were renting and we just put that in and that has really helped keep the room cooler. Number 5, get morning sunlight. It helps with melatonin regulation. I've been doing this since Trump got elected and my sleep first started getting pretty bad. Number 6, get out of bed if in bed longer than 15 minutes when you wake up. And this is try to only associate the bedroom with sleep and sex. And again, I had heard this before, but this is more of the science is connecting stimulus and response and making your body know bedroom equals sleep instead of tossing and turning in anxiety. So I sometimes don't get out of bed for an hour if I'm up and it still helps. I can feel a difference as I used to go in my bedroom and feel like, oh, Jesus, how is tonight going to go? And I just would feel anxious and it didn't feel like a relaxing place. And now I feel much safer and more relaxed there. Number 7, for me, I need to eat a snack before bed to stabilize my blood sugar. And I actually had to do this in pregnancy and it seems like it's still needed. So I do some protein plus fat plus complex carbs. Right now I'm doing some organic turkey breast, a few nuts and grapes. Not everyone will need this. And we've all heard, don't eat 3 hours before bed. And context and nuance means there are never absolutes for any dietary or body advice. The nights I've tried to skip this because I'm super lazy, I wake up. And if you're in perimenopause and you find yourself waking up in the middle of the night hungry, all of a sudden you may need to do it too. You might not. And if you're waking up hungry in the middle of the night, try it and see if it helps. Number 8, take more breaks throughout the day so you are unwinding your body and mind instead of thinking you can go from like 100 to 0. I assume because my life is quite intentional and consciously chosen, meaning like I love my routine. I love my son. I love my work. Carlos and I get along great. I love him. I just assume like I'm not stressed. I'm not going, but my life is nonstop, right? I think a lot of us, like I did not feel this way when I didn't have a child, but now it's just like, get up, get Essa, get breakfast, walk to daycare, right? Work out, eat, go get Essa, play with Essa, eat dinner, get him to bed, get ready for the next day. It all begins again. Get the lunches ready, right? Even my sense of time is speeding up. It's totally bananas. But I'm trying to take more breaks throughout the day so that I don't feel so wound up. And that includes in my body. Number 9, I don't check my phone after 7 p.m. And if I do, I turn on the red light on my iPhone. You can control how much red or blue light is on your screen. And I make sure it's all reds because blue light is what keeps you up. My sleep coach told me not to watch any screens an hour before bed, but that's the only time Carlos and I can watch TV. Essa goes to bed at like 9. I wear blue blocking glasses for when, like the same ones I use on my computer. And that seems to be working for me most of the times because when I am waking up, it's really about still that bedtime snack and a gut infection that my lab work showed. So there's also a lot of gut stuff. You make the majority of your melatonin in your gut. You make the majority of your serotonin in your gut. And it's too much of a tangent for this episode. But if you're curious, I can talk about how the lab work I did with my sleep coach, what I'm learning about how gut infections are affecting my sleep and how this is, just all connected. Again, good news and bad news. But I can talk about that on the IG Live next Wednesday if anyone's interested. So let me know. But maybe it's not interesting to people, but I'm just fascinated at how the gut microbiome continues to influence all of our health in so many ways. And I bring this up because many of us develop different sleep habits during COVID, and it's really important to return to some sleep foundations for food and life satisfaction. Okay, next foundation, relationships. So do you remember when I asked you to remember your favorite meal and who was with you? This is for a couple of different physical reasons. First, when we have people around us, we feel safe to be ourselves. Our social nervous system relaxes and we digest better. Because you aren't what you eat, you are what you absorb and metabolize. And so when our social nervous system is activated, we will either not digest our food as well, or digestion slows a lot, and decreasing the felt sense of satisfaction we have. I had one client realize she could eat dairy without any stomach problems when she was with people she loved, versus at work, it made her bloated and gave her heartburn. That's pretty neat, right? That's the power of, we can call it stress, but we can also call it the power of the social nervous system. Also, being with other people creates the natural pleasure chemical of oxytocin. So oxytocin is often associated with baby mother bonding or cuddling. You get it from touch. And we need pleasure chemicals like oxytocin, endorphins, and serotonin. And if we don't get these, we will go for more intense pleasure chemicals like dopamine, because again, we're coming from a deficit of pleasure chemicals. And this is what social media, gambling, and processed foods are all about, dopamine hits. And we'll get to that in a second. But think of your body physiologically as having a stress pleasure checkbook. And I'll get more to that in a minute. But we need enough pleasure chemicals so that we don't go for more extreme pleasure chemicals like dopamine. So Stanford University scientists published a study in the journal Science where they found that bursts of oxytocin coincide with positive social interactions, and our brains are overwhelmed with a feeling of reward. So if we relate this to food satisfaction, we will feel more satisfied in our body with eating from great company because of the oxytocin flooding our system. If there's an absence of social satisfaction in our meals in life, we will feel less intensely internally satisfied or uplifted in our bodies. So if you think about all the social satisfaction COVID took away from our lives, part of it was it took away an important source of pleasure chemicals. When I work with clients, they can often connect that portion control is easy when the conversation and company is nourishing. Pleasure chemicals are integral to the body. They are evolutionary because we are social animals and our body is incentivizing us to be with people. Our immune systems get stronger. There's so many downstream effects of being with others. And if we don't get these pleasure chemicals like oxytocin from being with others or from touch or endorphins with exercise, we will find other sources. And where do you think we can easily access those? Junk food. The official scientific term is hyperpalatable foods, sugar, starchy, fatty, and salty foods. Because hyperpalatables hijack our brain's reward system and give us incredible hits of dopamine, a very powerful pleasure chemical. Think of it like eating these foods as a casino win in your body. Dopamine also signals to your brain to take notice of what's happening so you can get more of the things that bring you pleasure. So then you become more aware of these kinds of food and seek them out, as dopamine motivates us to seek rewards too. It's sometimes the reason we, quote, look forward to these foods, especially after a stressful day, as your body has an intuitive experience of the pleasure chemicals you need. Stress produces adrenaline and cortisol, which are stress chemicals. So again, if we go back to this checkbook metaphor, the way that I see it is the body pairs stress and pleasure chemicals together so that it's balanced. So the checkbook is balanced. So for example, we feel adrenaline when we're attracted to someone. The body then balances this out with an orgasm and hopefully a child, right? And the pleasure chemicals of dopamine and oxytocin. Or if you have adrenaline, you're trying to accomplish something. And it's actually the thrill of not knowing, if you will, right? The intermittent rewards social media is designed around, casinos too. that when you do accomplish the thing, you get the pleasure chemicals of dopamine too, and whatever other pleasure chemicals are involved. When you're like, I freaking did that, right? That's part of that feel goodness, if that's a word. I had an unmedicated birth. And so after all the adrenaline and cortisol, my body produced a natural rush of oxytocin and endorphins, because endorphins are often in a response to pain, right? So that's another way that this checkbook is set up: stress, pleasure. I'm providing these examples so you can see how the body is physiologically designed for stress and pleasure seeking in order for the species to continue on and for us to have some fun along the way. But when we are getting the pleasure from concentrated dopamine, which these foods provide, it isn't a sustainable source. Because another part of this vicious cycle is like what happens with most other addictions. You need more and more to get you the high as the dopamine receptors in your body become more desensitized to these hyperpalatable foods the longer we eat them. So if you're someone who has eliminated a lot of these foods in your life, you might find they are too sweet for you now. And this is partly why. You have a lot more receptors and they're more sensitive. So many of my clients are like, I never thought I'd say this, but this is too sweet for me. And I'm the same way. This is from not eating as much sugar and increasing pleasure chemicals, often from the stress reduction and emotional fulfillment that comes from rewriting our stories, which we'll get to in episode 4 of this season. I don't know if anyone remembers that book, Potatoes, Not Prozac. I read it in high school. It was a lot about this, and it was relating the sugar and depression connection, and it was focused on serotonin too, hence why you'd eat potatoes as complex carbs release serotonin. It included the same idea about feeding the body in a way that forced it to grow more pleasure receptors for things like dopamine and serotonin and become more sensitive to these receptors. Okay, back to social connection. So let's think about the social connection we lost over COVID, including the touch that comes from oxytocin, right? So your body doesn't care where it's getting the pleasure chemicals, if it's endorphins or oxytocin, right? It just needs them balanced. And if you think about if you've ever had a really good massage where there's lots of touch and you feel so relaxed, you probably aren't craving something super junky after it. High sugar and high fat foods are often the solution to the problem of lack of social connection or these pleasure chemicals, wherever we get them from, because they initially fill the gap of pleasure chemicals, yet their satisfaction yields over time. One client was telling me she was uncovering stuff and truths with food that she realized she could effortlessly eat a normal portion of pasta if it was part of a larger experience with friends and they were either cooking it all together or out to eat, catching up, versus when she was by herself at lunch eating at her desk. So the TLDR, which I had to learn from someone younger than me, means too long, didn't read. So if you skip through this part of the podcast or you're reading the transcript and you're like, wait, what did we just talk about? We will feel more satisfied from our food when we have other people we feel really safe and seen with around. As we learn to navigate out of COVID or learning to live with it, I really hope you'll make it a priority, safely get back in touch with people, literally, and have a great meal with them, or maybe mend some fences if necessary and it's safe to do so. The pleasure chemical understanding is important to recognize when it comes to how exercise can make us more satisfied from our food too. And exercise is our 4th foundational pillar. And part of that overall relationship to movement can be enhanced when we understand pleasure and stress chemicals and how muscle building makes us more sensitive to insulin and thus more satisfied with our food based on the carbohydrate insulin model I shared above. Again, our bodies require a balance of stress and pleasure chemicals. When it comes to exercise, adrenaline and cortisol, stress chemicals produced to help us exercise, to help us get up and go, lead to serotonin and endorphins. So and those are the feel-good chemicals. So when you understand this bigger holistic checkbook you need to balance of stress and pleasure chemicals, so many more forms of exercise actually count. And if we have an excess of adrenaline and cortisol, say from over-exercising, especially when we are already stressed, we are more likely to seek out pleasure from food to create that balance, especially because exercise and food have a strongly connected relationship. Excess exercise will be different for everyone. It depends on how in shape you are. So for example, I was super active during my pregnancy. And for the first year, I walked Essa everywhere. He was actually voted the most walked baby of our neighborhood by 2 different neighbors. Because what else do you do with an infant when you live near a really beautiful park. But I had lost my core. I had lost a lot of muscle, which I now know is partly because that's what happens in perimenopause, which makes us more insulin resistant, especially. And I had lost like cardiac abilities. I wasn't like, challenging myself, in part because of the plantar fasciitis, in part because of the insomnia, in part because, whoa, it takes a while for your body to readjust to childbirth. So I had to ease into working out again, because beyond walking, instead of going from like 1 to 100, to make sure there wasn't more adrenaline and cortisol or stress in my body than endorphins. And now that I've lost some weight, I've gained a lot of muscle, I'm sleeping better, I can really push myself further. I'm pushing myself much more than when I first got back to the gym. And I can feel so many more endorphins lately as my energy has returned and it's safe to push myself to a new, different level. So the more we overdo it with exercise, including not leaving enough recovery time, or with excess cardio, especially because cardio produces so much adrenaline and cortisol compared to, say, lifting weights or bar exercise, the more pleasure chemicals we need to balance our checkbook metaphor I'm using. And then we come to dread exercise because it isn't creating a natural feedback loop of movement was designed to do. So I remember there was a certain exercise class I was going to in Philly that I would actually need a nap from. And I thought that was good, that I was burning so many calories, not that my body was saying, this is too much. We should feel good, not exhausted and irritable after our workouts. And again, there's so much to untangle with how only doing exercise to eat so that you can eat more or not gain weight. But I first find understanding how our physiology plays into all of this motivating to make changes. So just like we need consistent drips of oxytocin, serotonin, that comes from healthy social relationships, we can get serotonin from something like walking, and both serotonin and endorphins from something like HIIT workouts, that's high intensity interval training, that are short, right? And that don't produce a lot of excess adrenaline and cortisol. And we can use something like walking or dancing, or really anything pleasurable after a stressful experience, to help balance our physiology, which gives us more physical agility to make healthy choices. It feels like less cravings and more satisfaction from less intense, high fat, high sugar food, because we aren't looking for as many pleasure chemicals to balance the stress pleasure chemical checkbook. How much wood could a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood? We recently switched Essa's daycare to one we can walk to, and I can't believe the difference in his evenings because we now walk home instead of driving. I often head there feeling tired or stagnant from working and sitting all day, and it's a brisk 10-minute walk there because I'm always running late. And it's a slow 45-minute casual walk home because Essa just loves to explore. We have all these like interesting rituals we do on the way home, like certain driveways he likes to go up. This one house has all these like little miniature toys out, and he stops and plays with those. So, but when we come back from that, Carlos and I both remarked that we go into dinner feeling so much more uplifted and relaxed, right? And that's that serotonin, which carbs also give us. And so you got to get your serotonin. It's a matter of where. So research shows even a 15-minute walk after a meal can bring insulin levels down, which will make you feel more satisfied from your food. So bringing insulin down by helping ushering glucose into your cells is critical for food satisfaction. And this is also why strength training is particularly important to incorporate, as it builds muscle and makes you more insulin sensitive, meaning your body will hear your food better and be able to absorb it more. When we become insulin resistant from too much inflammation and certain types of fat in the body, it's like our cells put headphones on and can't hear the food. And so it doesn't get absorbed as efficiently or as much into your body. And then what doesn't get used gets stored as fat, and then we're still hungry, right? So this is part of what the carbohydrate insulin model showed, why people gain weight. It wasn't from a certain amount of energy or calories. It was from a certain type of energy, which was a rush of it that comes when our blood sugar isn't regulated. It's also important to note you can't tell by someone's body shape if they're insulin resistant or not. Many thin or thinner people are metabolically unsound. And so please remember that for understanding if you are at risk or not. And given I'm basically in menopause based on my recent lab work with my sleep coach, I can tell you that we women tend to lose a lot of lean body mass in perimenopause and are much more insulin sensitive because of the hormonal changes. So we are normally more insulin sensitive, like I said, the week before and during our period. And the closer we get from 35 to 52-ish, the typical range of perimenopause, the more insulin sensitive will be overall from the change in our hormones. So strength training becomes really critical to feeling more satisfied from your food. So you feel more insulin sensitive and to help with our weight and bone health. So exercise and everyday movement influences how satisfied we feel from our food via the mechanisms above. And if you aren't getting enough exercise, you are missing out on serotonin and endorphins, which you might find yourself turning to food for that lift. So the best way I can tell you to gauge what is the just right amount of exercise is that you should feel energized and up after a workout, not dread and dreading it next time. And your overall exercise week should feel doable. Like I had to drop down to 4 days a week in July because I was so exhausted because I barely slept that month, which is when I hired my sleep coach. I was desperate. And then in August, I started sleeping better. And it took me until a couple of weeks ago to get back to 5 days a week because I just had to catch up on sleep. But 5 days feels really good for me. I used to think I had to do 6 and it had to be long, but I now know like what satiation feels like in my body, even around exercise from that intuitive sense. And so 5 days feels really good. And it's 2 days of boxing, 3 days of strength training. And it feels like really like manageable, not like oppressive. So that's also another way to start to gauge it intuitively. Often our bodies are making intuitive connections, even if we aren't. And then we think we're lazy when our bodies are saying, we need a rest. So COVID really changed how most of us work out. And as we move out into the world again, see what worked for you during quarantine, what you missed, and perhaps what makes sense now that you know more about the body and how exercise influences food satisfaction from this episode. Okay, so a quick recap because this episode feels long. I hope you were able to hang and it was good information and helpful. So we often think what is most satisfying is when we are coming from a place of deprivation. The suggestions I have for you today will help you stay in a happy medium or middle. As I say, moderation is the new radical. Macros, know where you sit on the vegetarian to medium to paleo spectrum. They all have different macro amounts in terms of your macros. And this will help dramatically and is an instant way to increase food satisfaction. I have a breakfast experiment, alishapiro.com/breakfast-experiments. I'll also put it in the show notes here. For sleep, get 7 to 9 hours of sleep to keep ghrelin and leptin balanced in a way you want them to feel a healthy hunger and satisfied from your food. Relationships, eat great food with great people and stay in touch, literally, to feel your pleasure chemical bank so you don't need hyperpalatable foods to light up your dopamine reward centers at mealtime or more holistically. Exercise. Move your body in a way that feels good and don't over or underdo exercise so you get a nice balance of adrenaline, cortisol, and endorphins and serotonin. And again, remember to match what is enough exercise with the season of life you are in and your other stresses. My sleep coach had said to me, if your adrenals had come back fatigued, I was going to say, you got to stop exercising, right? Because that was going to disrupt my sleep. So there's a lot of complexity here. You don't have to figure it out all in this podcast, but I'm just really passionate about people understanding what's actually happening with their bodies rather than blaming themselves and thinking that there's no solutions. So you really want to think of what exercise and timing is its own reward. So you get the serotonin and endorphins. All right. One thing I didn't focus on because this episode is pretty long with the updates and all that stuff is where we source our food can influence food satisfaction and including how satisfied we feel from cooking. We will touch on this next episode since this was an important inquiry for myself after I found myself leaving Costco with all these packaged snacks for Essa. They were organic and quote healthy yet processed. And I wondered how I ended up buying all this food in a warehouse when I used to love farmers market shopping and now I barely cook. So I'll share how I got back into cooking more enough so that Essa still has some Costco snacks because I'm never going to be that person. And I wish I could be, but I'm not. But he also has more whole food snacks now and I'm cooking more. So we're going to go talk about that in the next episode. Megan Teltner will be here as my guest as her approach to keeping cooking simple, focusing on the essentials, and her recipes help me bridge where I was to where I wanted to go. So I asked her to be on the show and she said, yes. So stay tuned for that episode in 2 weeks. And I just want to thank you for joining me here, especially long-term listeners. I appreciate all your excitement about the season and you staying with me longer than my expected podcasting pause. That was just really honoring what life and my body were asking of me versus my own agenda. And that's kind of what I'm trying to practice the second half of my life. And remember, if you have any questions about the episode, DM me on Instagram at Allie M. Shapiro, Shapiro, and Allie is ALI. And I'll answer them on my IG Live next Wednesday, October 6th. And I think we're going to try a noon time and see how that goes. But it'll be posted on the feed. And if you're on my list, you'll get the official time. And if you can't join me live, remember the recording will be on my feed. All right. Thanks again for joining me. Have a wonderful week. And I'll see you back here again next time. Thank you, health rebels and visionary storytellers, for tuning in today. If you know someone who would benefit from this episode, please share it with them. And remember, we have transcripts of our episodes at allieshapiro.com/podcast for your non-audio friends and family. And if you can, I'd love it if you can leave a review on Apple Podcasts. It helps more people find the show. And both actions, reviewing and sharing with others, helps us change the cultural narrative around food, weight, and our bodies. Thanks for engaging in a different kind of conversation. And remember, always, your body truths are unique, discoverable, profound, and liberating.